Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. Oh, nice! Warren Steele got out of his meeting early, so he's here for the whole shebang. Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and I'm just going to get the clarion call out to my usuals here. None of them will show up, but that's okay because it's a Friday. When they're able to show up, they're able to show up. When they're not, they're not. All right. So, I don't actually remember what text I used, so I'm just going to fake it here. Should have done this before I actually started talking, but here we are. Oops, wrong one, wrong one, right one. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, you have this image of, well, guys on futuristic Vespas, and or is it a side hacker? I think it's a futuristic Vespa and a futuristic car. I love that ray gun gothic, like fish finned um, aesthetic appeal. It really it warms the cockles of my heart. Very Rocket Man. King of the Rocket Men. Yes, yes, the king. So this is from Astounding Science-Fiction, a Street and Smith publication. 20 cents from June of 1940. I've also realized the reason I've had such blurry stuff coming before for my read along withs is because I've been doing the PDFs, and for whatever reason, the PDFs that I've got for these are bad. And I need to use CBZ files instead because they are crystalline, crystal clear, excellent high quality scans. So just astounding science fiction from 1940s things. I'm from Missouri, and Listerine certainly showed me, says Mrs. Madge Purdy Van Cott. When I became a nurse, I first heard of the peculiar bottle-shaped bacillus Pityrosporum ovale, nearly always found in high concentrations in infectious dandruff conditions, and how important it is to keep this and other organisms under control. Time and again, I prescribed Listerine antiseptic and massage. Time and again, I saw dandruff scales disappear. When I got married and my baby came, I knew how to help keep her scalp clean and healthy. I have shown my husband how to guard against infectious dandruff too. I gave him a vigorous Listerine massage regularly. A slight dandruff condition he had at one time quickly improved. He's never without Listerine antiseptic now. I think you're right. It is a mono wheel, isn't it? I don't see a second wheel there. You're right. Thank you for pointing that out. 76% of infectious dandruff cases benefited in clinical tests. If you are plagued by dandruff so often caused by germs, don't waste any more time. Start today with the famous Listerine antiseptic treatment. Just douse the scalp morning and night with full-strength Listerine antiseptic, the same Listerine which has been famed for more than 50 years as an antiseptic mouthwash and gargle. Then massage scalp and hair vigorously and persistently. You'll be delighted with the cooling, soothing, tingling sensation. And think of it! This wonderfully invigorating treatment is precisely the same as that which, within 30 days, brought about complete disappearance of or marked improvement in the symptoms of dandruff to 76% of the men and women who used it twice daily in clinical tests. So, If you've been fighting a losing battle against dandruff, don't neglect what may be a real infection. Start right now with Listerine Antiseptic and Massage. It's the treatment which has proved so useful against infectious dandruff in a substantial majority of clinical test cases. Lambert Pharmacal Co., St. Louis, Missouri. Ah, so advertisements and Listerine in your hair. Sounds fun. Let's see. I'm gonna skip the index. There are actually one or two others here that I'd like to read, but I'm not going to be able to get to them today because my time's limited. First aid to sick plugs. Clean plugs put engines back on their feet and stop gas waste. Modern fuels, high engine temperatures, and high engine compressions cause a crust of oxide coating to form quickly on spark plugs. The symptoms are wasted gasoline, sluggish performance, and hard starting. Oxide coating forms in 4,000 miles, and you never know it's present. But thanks to registered AC spark plug cleaning stations, there's an easy remedy. For more than 31 years, the quality spark plug. Buick, Cadillac, Chevrolet, LaSalle, Nash, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac motor cars. Chevrolet, Diamond T, Federal, GMC, and International trucks. Alice Chalmers, Cletrac, who I've never heard of, and International Harvester tractors. These are some of the well-known cars, trucks, and tractors which use AC quality spark plugs. Trust your spark plug requirements to the same brand of spark plugs which the leading big volume manufacturers select. Get a set and get the difference. AC Spark Plug Division, General Motors Corporation, Flint, Michigan. It would be Flint. Warren Steele says, fun fact, antiseptics were widely used before the discovery of antibiotics and often did more harm than good when applied to open wounds. Of this, I have no doubt. Here's the cure for spark plug troubles. Look for this sign. 70,000 service places display it. It's got a horse on it. That's how you know. Have plugs cleaned by the AC method. Cleaning includes regapping to the engineer's standards. Oh yeah, it would be regapping. The cost is only 5 cents each, the biggest nickel's worth you ever got. Spark plugs need cleaning too. Replace worn plugs with new ACs. So, just giving people a sense of the texture of the era. So there are a variety of stories in this one. The one we're going to do is The Roads Must Roll by Robert Heinlein, which I have actually read before. I'm not sure if I've read it on stream before. I've got it in one of my Heinlein collections somewhere. The more complex, the more integrated a civilization is, the more fragile it becomes to sabotage. Then you've got The Carbon Eater by Douglas Drew, which, if you were made of silicon and your enemy, an Earthman maybe, made of carbon, it'd be easy to ruin him. So technically what I'm going to read to you is not a short story, it's a novelette. Now I need to remember now to mention novelettes in my spiel. I am not entirely sure what the difference between a novelette and a novella is off the top of my head. I'm not sure if they are actually a distinct concept. Let's see, short stories. Deputy Correspondent by Harl Vincent. Highly educated Venusian are doing excellent as correspondent when the Earthmen didn't know who was fighting which. It's written goofy deliberately. The Testament of Akubi, or Akubii, by Norman L. Knight. When a spaceship goes out with two and comes back with only one man, and that one with a suspicious tale to tell. And then we have a serial, the conclusion to a serial of Final Blackout by L. Ron Hubbard. Yes, the man, the myth, the shyster. L. Ron, let's start a religion to keep from paying taxes. Hubbard. That one. Hey, it was a good idea. I wish I'd had it first. Ending a great and grim novel of the end of the current war. Let's see. Articles. We've got an article on unseen tools by Leo Vernon. Fourth dimension? Ha! The mathematician likes to play with 150 quintillion dimensional space. As you do. Introduction to a Nameless Science by Peter Van Dresser. A fact article on facts stranger than science fiction, discussing a science so new it has not yet been named. Oh, I might have to check that one out at the end of the. That's on page 100. At the end of this, I'll have to check that out. I love reading reading those. Being like, oh my goodness, we thought that was complete goofery then. We think it's a joke now, except when we don't, like electroshock therapy. Let's see. Readers' departments. You've got the editor's page. You've got In Times to Come, Department of Prophecy and Future Issues. You've got the Analytical Laboratory and Analysis of Readers' Opinions. I just said like 5 minutes ago I wasn't going to read this, but I'm doing it anyway. Brass Tacks and Science Discussions. Open House at Controversy. Controversy. And there are illustrations by M. Isip, R. Isip, Colliker, and Schneeman. The cover is by Rogers. Hi, Rogers. This is your work. We appreciate you, Rogers. I think it looks fantastic. It's that nice burnished chrome look. It just works for me. I'm sorry. A novelette is longer than a short story, which usually has a word range of between 1,000 and 7,500 words, and flash fiction, which is usually under 1,000 words. Any piece of creative writing that is longer than a novelette but shorter than a novel is considered a novella. Okay. So anything between I don't know what you'd call a novel then. Anything greater than 7,500 words, so anything between 7,500 and upper bound limit not detected. Actually, that's not true. That depends on your publisher, as I have learned via Peter Watts. Not every publisher will publish your book if it is too long. Let's see. What is this? Oh, it's for ever-ready extra long life batteries. Cool. I thought it was the old man in the sea for a minute. Cool. Ah, the heavy line dragged me toward eternity. A true experience of C.J. Latimer from Warren, Ohio. Warren, Ohio? Another fisherman and myself had just finished setting a heavy trot line in Lake Erie, writes Mr. Latimer, when a sudden treacherous squall lashed out of nowhere and churned the water into towering waves. A wave smacked us broadside, and over we went. Then I felt a heavy drag on my leg. I was caught in the trot line and was being pulled to my doom. In the darkness, my companion couldn't untangle me. But one of our party on shore brought his flashlight into action. Its powerful beam cut the distance and darkness, and in a minute I was free. I shudder to think of what might have happened except for those dependable, ever-ready, fresh, dated batteries. Signed, C.J. Latimer, I guess. The word ever-ready is a registered trademark of National Carbon Co., Incorporated. Fresh batteries last longer. Look for the date line. National Carbon Company, Incorporated, 30 East 42nd Street, New York, New York. Unit of Union Carbide, UCC, and Carbon Corporation. And here is the editor's note, which is basically griping about how the Army doesn't have any good writers in 1940. The old Navy game. Thank God I had a battery to cook the fish, says Optical Antenna. Selling top-notch science fiction seems to be the current Navy game. It's rather surprising, considering the total number of possible occupations, to realize that Robert A. Heinlein, Malcolm Jameson, and Kent Casey are all graduates of the United States Fleet. L. Ron Hubbard belongs in the Navy list, too. He was in the Fleet Reserve Marine Corps, and belongs to a thoroughly Navy family. For the benefit of any Army man who might be listening, may I point out the score stands 4-0 in favor of the Navy so far? Wow. So there's no sass here towards the Army at all. None. No sass. L. Sprague de Camp is primarily a scholar, but somehow the Navy crops up again. He's greatly interested in the Navy. Several of his photographs have appeared in Jane's Fighting Ships of the World, the authoritative catalog of the world's navies. Maybe there's something mystical about it, but I have a hunch it's something else. Risking the cracks about to descend upon me, I'll guess as follows. The Navy has more of a literary tradition than the Army. Therefore, a man well trained in military work is well trained on one very essential factor: details. If you send out a landing force with 1,000 tents to establish a camp on a sand and scrub shore and don't think of tent pegs, somebody's going to be awful annoyed. You just have to forget one item, a new supply of primers, for instance, to find yourself absurdly helpless and probably dead. Mapping out a civilization of the future is an essential background to a convincing story of the future. You don't have to put it all in. You don't describe New York minutely in a modern story. But you've got to have that carefully mapped outline in mind to get consistency of minor details. Witness Heinlein's references to courses in applied miracles, the motivation Hubbard used in driving the lieutenant back to GHQ. Not for a purpose grand and noble and new, but to get shoes that didn't have holes in them. It's the very minor things that make things real. The difference in tone between the distant beep of an automobile horn and the beep of a cricket might make all the difference between New York 1940 and New York 1640. Men who work with detail seem to have an inside track. Men who plan campaigns of action against the background of small things carefully thought out. Maybe that's the reason for occupational preference in the top line writers. Which suggests we have yet to hear from architects, civil engineers, a dozen other occupations. And leaves me, personally, with a vague wonder as to what the heck's delayed the United States Army, says the editor. I just want to point out that within the last 3 years, previous 3 years of this publication, E. Doc Smith was submitting regularly some of the earlier Lensman stories, and I don't think he was Navy. Doc Smith. I think he was an engineer, wasn't he? Edward Elmer Smith, publishing as E. Smith, Ph.D., and later as E. Doc Smith, was an American food engineer specializing in donut and pastry mixes, and science fiction author, best known for the Lensman and Skylark series. Yeah. Don't worry, we will one day get around to doing some Lensman stories. I have the collection. I have read it many times myself. I adore them. We'll get to it. I promise we'll get to it. Someday. If I don't keep finding other things to read on stream at some other point in time. Remember radio? I remember radio. It's a good thing TV didn't kill the radio star. You can, at some point, read how these men got better jobs, then find out what radio offers you mail coupon. But these people didn't go to college, and you can read about the jobs they got and the money they make. But I'm not going to read them to you. You can, if you're watching this after the fact, you can pause the stream and hopefully read the actually microscopic text. Oh, geez. That's small even on my large screen. So good luck with that. Radio is a young, growing field with a future, offering many good pay. Listen, I did radio briefly, very briefly, so I am a radio person. I can laugh at radio being dead jokes. Maybe other people can't. I don't know. Radio is a young, growing field with a future, offering many good pay, Many good pay, spare time, and full-time job opportunities. And you don't have to give up your present job to become a radio technician. I train you right at home in your spare time. Why many I'm going to read it anyway. I've got nothing better to do, I guess. Why many radio technicians make $30, $40, $50 a week. That's actually pretty good bread, particularly for 1940. Jeez. Radio broadcasting stations employ engineers, operators, technicians. Radio manufacturers employ testers, inspectors, foremen, servicemen in good paid jobs. Radio jobbers, dealers employ installation and servicemen. What? Many radio technicians open their own radio sales and repair businesses and make $30, $40, $50 a week. Others hold their regular jobs and make $5 to $10 a week fixing radios in spare time. Automobile, police, aviation, commercial radio, loudspeaker systems, electronic devices are other fields offering opportunities for which NRI gives the required knowledge of radio. Television promises to open good jobs soon when, someday when television becomes a viable technology. Make $5 to $10 a week extra in spare time while learning. The day you enroll, I start sending. Who is I? Mr. J.E. Smith. Okay, there we go. The day you enroll, I start sending you extra money job sheets, or EMJSs, which start showing you how to do radio repair jobs. Throughout your course, I send plans and directions which have helped many make $200 to $500 a year in spare time while learning. I send special radio equipment to conduct experiments and build circuits. This 50-50 training method makes learning at home interesting, fascinating, practical. I also give you a modern, professional, all-wave, all-purpose set servicing instrument, in all caps, to help you make money fixing radios while learning and equip you for full-time work after you graduate. Find out what radio offers you. Mail coupon below. Act today. Mail the coupon for my 64-page book, Rich Rewards in Radio. It points out radio's spare time and full-time opportunities and those coming in television. Tells about my course in radio and television. Shows many letters from men, I'm guessing who got cut off, have trained, telling what they are doing and earning. Read my money-back agreement. Mail coupon in an envelope. A paste on a penny postcard. Something paste on a penny postcard. Now. J.E. Smith, President, Department OED, National Radio Institute, Washington, D.C. Considering 1940, that actually wouldn't have been a bad way to start, considering you'd go out and get drafted into World War II in about 2 years. And a whole lot of people came back from that war with a lot of radio repair knowledge. That became like one of the working class jobs of the time. It's very cool. Goose Creek, Texas. Goose Creek, Texas. Yeah. Arlie J. Froner says, I've been in business for myself for 18 months, making $200 to $300 a month. Arlie J. Froner. Froner? Frockner? I think that's an H. Froner from 224 West Texas Ave in Goose Creek, Texas. So good stuff. Here's an advertisement for another magazine. Nightmares Unknown, the magazine of the off-trail story. I should see if I can find any of those. That could be fun. Do you like the feeling of cold lizard feet down your spine? Of course, there are no ghosts. Maybe. And there's no reason at all to be afraid of the empty dark. Maybe. But if you like to think a little of things that may people the empty dark, of ghosts that make your backbone soft, then you'd like Unknown. Starting with the July issue, Unknown makes its appearance as the high-type literary fantasy magazine that it is. Its new cover is as dignified as a member of Parliament, and you'll find it on the newsstands among the general magazines, not among the all-fiction group. Something of a coup at the time. I think it's a cool sketch. Actually, no, I couldn't tell you who that is. I know who it reminds me of. It almost reminds me of, well, no, not Gil Kane. Although, wouldn't he be nearly a contemporary? When was Gil Kane active? Forget it. We're sidetracked. Let's move on. I've got a whole story to read. And then whatever is going on page 100. Let's smash through that because this is like 30 pages. 65, page 100. Introduction to a Nameless Science. How long is that? 1, 2, 3, cool. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, geez, Louise. Okay, I can make that work. Let me just get all the way back to where we wanted to be here. There we go. Sorry about that. I did not plan this out very well ahead of time. Longtime viewers will notice Frag just kind of does this by the seat of his pants. That's the analogy I'm looking for. Idiom I'm looking for. The Roads Must Roll by Robert Heinlein. The higher civilization becomes, the more it is dependent on each unit, and the more it is at the mercy of a few. Who makes the roads roll? The speaker stood on the rostrum and waited for his audience to answer him. The reply came in scattered shouts that cut through the ominous, discontented murmur of the crowd. We do! We do! Damn right! Who does the dirty work down inside so that Joe Public can ride at ease, at his ease? This time it was a single roar. We do! The speaker pressed his advantage, his words tumbling out in a rasping torrent. He leaned toward the crowd, his eyes picking out individuals at whom to fling his words. What makes business? The roads. How do they move the food they eat? The roads. How do they get to work? The roads. How do they get home to their wives? The roads. He paused for effect, then lowered his voice. Where would the public be if you boys didn't keep them roads rolling behind the 8 ball, and everybody knows it? But do they appreciate it? Did we ask for too much? Were our demands unreasonable? The right to resign whenever we want to. Every working stiff has every This voice is killing me. Every working stiff in any other job has that. The same pay as the engineers. Why not? Who are the real engineers around here? Do you have to be a cadet in a funny little hat before you can learn to wipe a bearing or jack down a rotor? Who earns his keep? The gentlemen in the control offices or the boys down inside? What else do we ask? The right to elect our own engineers. Why the hell not? Who's competent to pick engineers? The technicians? Or some damn dumb examining board that's never been down inside and couldn't tell a rotor bearing from a field coil? He changed his pace with natural art, and lowered his voice still further. I tell you, brother, it's time we quit fiddling around with petitions to the Transport Commission and use a little direct action. Let 'em yammer about democracy. That's a lot of eyewash. We've got the power, and we're the men that count. A man had risen in the back of the hall while the speaker was haranguing. He spoke up as the speaker paused. Brother Chairman, he drawled, may I stick a couple of words? May I stick in a couple of words? You are recognized, Brother Harvey. What I ask for is, what's all the shooting for? We've got the highest hourly rate of pay of any mechanical guild, full insurance and retirement, and safe working conditions, barring the chance of going deaf. He pushed his anti-noise helmet farther back from his ears. He was still in dungarees, apparently just up from standing watch. Of course, we have to give 90 days notice to quit a job, but cripes, we knew that when we signed up. The roads have got to roll. They can't stop every time some lazy punk gets tired of his billet. And now, Soapy, the crack of the gavel cut him short. Pardon me, I mean Brother Soapy. Oh, whoops. And now, Soapy, I was misreading the lack of quotation marks at the end. And now, Soapy, the crack of the gavel cut him short. Pardon me, I mean Brother Soapy tells us how powerful we are and how we should go in for direct action. Rats! Sure, we could tie up the roads and play hell with the whole community, but so could any screwball with a can of nitroglycerin, and he wouldn't have to be a technician to do it neither. We aren't the only frogs in the puddle. Our jobs are important, sure, but where would we be without the farmers, or the steel workers, or a dozen other trades and professions? He was interrupted by a shallow little man with protruding upper teeth, who said, "Just a minute, Brother Chairman. I'd like to ask Brother Harvey a question." Then turned to Harvey and inquired in a sly voice, "Are you speaking for the guild, brother, or just for yourself? Maybe you don't believe in the guild. You wouldn't by any chance be—" He stopped and slid his eyes up and down Harvey's lank frame. "A spotter, would you?" Harvey looked over his questioner as if he had found something filthy in a plate of food. "Sykes," he told him, "if you weren't a runt, I'd stuff your store teeth down your throat. I helped found this guild. I was on strike in '60. Where were you in '60? With the Finks?" The chairman's gavel pounded. "There's been enough of this," he said. "Nobody that knows anything about the history of this guild doubts the loyalty of Brother Harvey. We'll continue with the regular order of business." He stopped to clear his throat. "Ordinarily, we don't open our floor to outsiders, and some of you boys have expressed a distaste for some of the engineers we work under, but there is one engineer we always like to listen to whenever he can get away from his pressing duties. I guess maybe it's because he's had dirt under his nails the same as us. Anyhow, I present at this time Mr. Shorty Van Cleek." A shout from the floor stopped him. "Brother Van Cleek!" "Okay, Brother Van Cleek, Chief Deputy Engineer of this road town." "Thanks, Brother Chairman." The guest speaker came briskly forward and grinned expansively at the crowd. He seemed to swell under their approval. "Thanks, brothers. I guess our chairman is right. I always feel more comfortable here than in the guild hall of the Sacramento sector, or any guild hall for that matter, than I do in the engineers' clubhouse. Those young punk cadet engineers get in my hair. Maybe I should have gone to one of the fancy technical institutes, so that I'd have the proper point of view, instead of coming up from down inside. Now, about those demands of yours that the Transport Commission just threw back in your face. Can I speak freely?" "Sure you can, Shorty. You can trust us." "Well, of course I shouldn't say anything, but I can't help but understand how you feel. The roads are the big show these days, and you are the man who make them roll. It's the natural order of things that your opinions should be listened to, and your desires met. One would think that even politicians would be bright enough to see that. Sometimes, lying awake at night, I wonder why we technicians don't just take over and—" "Your wife is calling, Mr. Gaines." "Very well." He flicked off the office intercommunicator and picked up a telephone handset from his desk. "Yes, darling, I know I promised, but—" "You're perfectly right, darling, but Washington has especially requested that we show Mr. Blenkinsop anything he wants to see. I didn't know he was arriving today." "No, I can't turn him over to a subordinate. It wouldn't be courteous. He's the Minister of Transport for Australia. I told you that." "Yes, darling, I know that courtesy begins at home, but the roads must roll. It's my job. You knew that when you married me. And this is a part of my job." "That's a good girl. We'll positively have breakfast together. We'll positively have breakfast together. Tell you what, order horses and a breakfast pack and we'll make it a picnic. I'll meet you in Bakersfield. Usual place. Goodbye, darling. Kiss Junior good night for me." He replaced the handset, whereupon the pretty but indignant features of his wife faded from the visor screen. A young woman came into his office. As she opened the door, she exposed momentarily the words painted on its outer side: "Diego Reno Road Town, Officer of the Chief Engineer. Office of the Chief Engineer." He gave her a harassed glance. "Oh, it's you. Don't marry an engineer, Dolores. Marry an artist. They have more home life. Yes, Mr. Gaines. Mr. Blenkinsop is here, Mr. Gaines. Already? I didn't expect him so soon. The Antipodes ship must have grounded early. Antipodes, I think is how that's pronounced. Sorry. Isn't it? I can't remember the last time I've heard that pronounced aloud, so I'm gonna go with my gut on that. I might be wrong. Yes, Mr. Gaines. Dolores, don't you ever have any emotions? Yes, Mr. Gaines. It seems incredible, but you are never mistaken. Show Mr. Blenkinsop in. Very good, Mr. Gaines. Larry Gaines got up to greet his visitor. Not a particularly impressive little guy, he thought, as they shook hands and exchanged formal amenities. The rolled umbrella, the bowler hat, were almost too good to be true. An Oxford accent partially masked the underlying clipped, flat, nasal twang of the native Australia. It's a pleasure to meet you here, Mr. Blenkinsop, and I hope we can make your stay enjoyable. The little man smiled. I'm sure it will be. This is my first visit to your wonderful country. I feel at home already. The eucalyptus trees, you know, then the brown hills. But your trip is primarily business? Yes, yes. My primary purpose is to study your road cities and report to my government on the advisability of trying to adapt your startling American methods to our social problems down under. I'm not doing this with an Oxford accent covering an Australian accent. That's just I don't even I can do one or the other, and we're going with Australian. Sorry. I thought you understood that such was the reason I was sent to you. Yes, I did in a general way. I don't know just what it is that you wish to find out. I suppose that you have heard about our road towns, how they came about, how they operate, and so forth. I've read a good bit, true, but I'm not a technical man, Mr. Gaines, not an engineer. My field is social and political. I want to see how this remarkable technical change has affected your people. Suppose you tell me about the roads as if I were entirely ignorant, and I will ask questions. That seems a practical plan. By the way, how many are there in your party? Just myself. My secretary went on to Washington. I see. Gaines glanced at his wristwatch. It's nearly dinner time. Suppose we run up to the Stockton sector for dinner. There's a good Chinese restaurant up there that I'm partial to. It will take us about an hour. You can see the ways in operation. You can see the ways in operation while we ride. Excellent. Gaines pressed a button on his desk, and a picture formed on a large visor screen mounted on the opposite wall. It showed a strong-boned, angular young man seated at a semicircular control desk, which was backed by a complex instrument board. A cigarette was tucked in one corner of his mouth. The young man glanced up, grinned, and waved from the screen. "Greetings and salutations, Chief. What can I do for you?" "Hi, Dave. You've got the evening watch, eh? I'm running up to the Stockton sector for dinner. Where's Van Cleek?" "Gone to a meeting somewhere. He didn't say." "Anything to report?" "No, sir. The roads are rolling, and all the little people are going righty home to their dinners." "Okay. Keep 'em rolling." "They'll roll, Chief." Gaines snapped off the connection and turned to Blenkinsop. Blenkinsop. Van Cleek is my chief deputy. I wish he'd spend more time on the road and less on politics. Davidson can handle things, however. Shall we go? They glided down an electric staircase and debouched on the walkway with on the walkway which bordered the northbound 5-mile-an-hour strip. After skirting a stairway trunk marked overpass to southbound road, they paused at the edge of the first strip. "Have you ever ridden a conveyor strip before?" Gaines inquired. "It's quite simple. Just remember to face against the motion of the strip as you get on." They threaded their way through homeward-bound throngs, passing from strip to strip. Down the center of the 20-mile-an-hour strip ran a glassite partition which reached nearly to the spreading roof. The Honorable Mr. Blenkinsop raised his eyebrows inquiringly as he looked at it. "Oh, that?" Gaines answered the unspoken question as he slid back a panel door and ushered his guest through. That's a windbreak. If we didn't have some way of separating the air currents over the strips of different speeds, the wind would tear our clothes off on the 100-mile-an-hour strip. He bent his head to Blenkinsop's as he spoke, in order to cut through the rush of air against the road surfaces, the noise of the crowd, and the muted roar of the driving mechanism concealed beneath the moving strips. The combination of noises inhibited further conversation as they proceeded toward the middle of the roadway. After passing through three more wind screens located at the 40, 60, and 80-mile-an-hour strips, respectively, they finally reached the maximum speed strip, the 100-mile-an-hour strip, which made the round trip, San Diego to Reno and back, in 12 hours. Blenkinsop found himself on a walkway 20 feet wide, facing another partition. Immediately opposite him, an illuminated show window proclaimed, "Jake's Steakhouse, number 4, the fastest meal on the fastest road. To dine on the fly makes the miles roll by." "Amazing," said Mr. Blenkinsop. "It would be like dining in a tram. Is this really a proper restaurant?"
"One of the best. Not fancy, but sound."
"Oh, I say, could we—"
Gaines smiled at him. "You'd like to try it, wouldn't you, sir?"
"I don't wish to interfere with your plans."
"Quite all right. I'm hungry myself, and Stockton is a long hour away. Let's go in."
Gaines greeted the manageress as an old friend.
"Hello, Mrs. McCoy. How are you tonight?"
"If it isn't the chief himself! It's a long time since we've had the pleasure of seeing your face." She led them to a booth somewhat detached from the crowd of dining commuters. "And will you and your friend be having dinner?"
"Yes, Mrs. McCoy. Suppose you order for us. But be sure it includes one of your steaks."
2 inches thick, from a steer that died happy." She glided away, moving her fat frame with surprising grace. With sophisticated foreknowledge of the chief engineer's needs, Mrs. McCoy had left a portable telephone at the table. Gaines plugged it into an accommodation jack at the side of the booth and dialed a number.
"Hello, Davidson? Dave, this is the chief. I'm in Jake's Steakhouse, number 4, for supper. You can reach me by calling 10L66."
He replaced the handset, and Blenkinsop inquired politely, "Is it necessary for you to be available at all times?"
"Not strictly necessary," Gaines told him, "but I feel safer when I'm in touch. Either Van Cleek or myself should be where the senior engineer of the watch, that's Davidson this shift, can get hold of us in a pinch. If it's a real emergency, I want to be there, naturally."
"What would constitute a real emergency?"
Two things principally. A power failure on the rotors would bring the road to a standstill, and possibly strand millions of people 100 miles or more from their homes. If it happened during a rush hour, we would have to evacuate those millions from the road. Not too easy to do."
"You say millions? As many as that?"
"Yes, indeed. There are 12 million people dependent on this roadway, living and working in the buildings adjacent to it, or within 5 miles of each side."
So we have this interesting futuristic civilization being painted here. The age of power blends into the age of transportation almost imperceptibly, but two events stand out as landmarks in the change: the invention of the sun power screen and the opening of the first moving road. The power resources of oil and coal of the United States had, save for a few sporadic outbreaks of common sense, been shamefully wasted in their development all through the first half of the 20th century. Simultaneously, the automobile, from its humble start as a one-lunged, horseless carriage, grew into a steel-bodied monster of over 100 horsepower and capable of making more than 100 miles an hour. They boiled over the countryside like yeast in ferment. In 1945, it was estimated that there was a motor vehicle for every 2 persons in the United States. Oh, buddy. Oh, buddy. Mm. Ah. They contained the seeds of their own destruction.
70 million steel juggernauts operated by imperfect human beings at high speed are more destructive than war. In the same reference year, the premiums paid for compulsory liability and property damage insurance by automobile owners exceeded in amount the sum paid the same year to purchase automobiles. Safe driving campaigns were chronic phenomena, but were mere pious attempts to put Humpty Dumpty together again. It was not physically possible to drive safely in those crowded metropolises. Pedestrians were sardonically divided into two classes, the quick and the dead. But a pedestrian could be defined as a man who had found a place to park his car. The automobile made possible huge cities, then choked those same cities to death with their numbers. In 1900, Herbert George Wells pointed out that the saturation point in the size of a city might be mathematically predicted in terms of its transportation facilities. From a standpoint of speed alone, the automobile made possible cities 200 miles in diameter, but traffic congestion and the inescapable, inherent danger of high powered, individually operated vehicles canceled out the possibility. In 1945, Federal Highway number 66 from Los Angeles to Chicago, the main street of America, was transformed into a superhighway for motor vehicles with an underspeed limit of 60 miles an hour per hour. It was planned as a public works project to stimulate heavy industry. It had an unexpected byproduct. The great cities of Chicago and St. Louis stretched out urban pseudopods toward each other until they met near Bloomington, Illinois. The two, the two parent cities actually shrunk in population. The same year, the city of San Francisco replaced its antiquated cable cars with moving stairways, powered with the Douglas Martin solar reception screens. The largest number of automobile licenses in history had been issued that calendar year, but the end of the automobile was in sight. The National Defense Act of 1947 closed its era. This act, one of the most bitterly debated ever to be brought out of committee, declared petroleum to be an essential and limited material of war. The Army and Navy had first call on all oil, above or below the ground, and 70 million civilian vehicles faced short and expensive rations. Take the superhighways of the period, urban throughout their length. Add the mechanized streets of San Francisco's hills. Heat to boiling point with an imminent shortage of gasoline. Flavor with Yankee ingenuity. The first mechanized road was opened in 1950 between Cincinnati and Cleveland. It was, as one would expect, comparatively primitive in design. The fastest strip moved only 30 miles an hour, and was quite narrow, for no one had thought of the possibility of locating retail trade on the strips themselves. Nevertheless, it was a prototype of the social pattern which was to dominate the American scene within the next 2 decades, neither rural nor urban, but partaking equally of both, and based on rapid, safe, cheap, convenient transportation. Factories, wide, low buildings whose roofs were covered with solar power screens of the same type that drove the road, lined the roadway on each side. Back of them and interspersed among them were the commercial hotels, retail stores, theaters, apartment houses. Beyond this long, thin, narrow strip was the open countryside where much of the population lived. Their homes dotted the hills, hung on the banks of creeks, and nestled between the farms. They worked in the city, but lived in the country, and the two were not 10 minutes apart. Mrs. McCoy served the chief and his guest in person. They checked their conversation at the sight of the magnificent steaks. Up and down the 600-mile line, sector sector engineers of the watch were getting their hourly reports from their subsector technicians. Subsector 1, check. Subsector 2, check. Tensiometer readings, voltage, load, bearing temperatures, synchrotachometer readings. Subsector 7, check. Hard-bitten, able men in dungarees who lived much of their lives down inside amidst the unmuted roar of the 100-mile strip, the shrill whine of driving motors, and the complaint of the relay rollers. Davidson studied the moving model of the road, spread out before him in the main control room at Fresno Sector. He watched the barely perceptible crawl of the miniature 100-mile strip and subconsciously noted the reference number on it which located Jake's Steakhouse number 4. The chief would be getting into Stockton soon. He'd give him a ring after the hourly reports were in. Everything was quiet. Traffic tonnage normal for rush hour. He would be sleepy before this watch was over. He turned to his cadet engineer of the watch. Mr. Barnes?
Yes, sir.
And here we have a nice picture with some guys on mono wheels. Apparently kidnapping a dude.
The patrol had him before he could reach the signal box to send an alarm, but somewhere ahead another had spotted them.
Or, they're just cops restraining a guy. This picture will be relevant later, I guess.
I think we could use some coffee.
Good idea, sir. I'll order some as soon as the hourlies are in.
The minute hand of the control board chronometer reached 12. The cadet watch officer threw a switch.
All sectors report, he said,
in crisp, self-conscious tones. The faces of two men flicked into view on the visor screen. The younger answered him with the same air of acting under supervision.
Diego Circle, rolling.
They were at once replaced by two more.
Angeles Sector, rolling.
Then,
Bakerfield Sector, rolling.
And
Stockton Sector, rolling.
Finally, when Reno Circle had reported, the cadet returned to Davidson and reported,
Rolling, sir.
Very well, keep them rolling.
The visor screen flashed on once more.
Sacramento Sector, supplementary report. Proceed. Cadet Engineer Gunter, while on visual inspection as Cadet Sector Engineer of the Watch, found Cadet Engineer Alec Jeans on watch as Cadet Subsector Technician, and R.J. Ross, Technician Second Class, on watch as Technician for the same subsector, engaged in playing cards. It was not possible to tell with any accuracy how long they had neglected to patrol their subsector. Any damage? One rotor running hot, but still synchronized. It was jacked down and replaced. Very well. Have the paymaster give Ross his time and turn him over to civil authorities. Place Cadet Jeans under arrest and order him to report to me. Very well, sir. Keep them rolling.
Davidson turned back to the control desk and dialed Chief Engineer Gaines' temporary number.
You mentioned that there were two things that could cause major trouble on the road, Mr. Gaines, but you spoke only of power failure to the rotors.
Gaines pursued an elusive bit of salad before answering.
There really isn't a second major trouble. It won't happen. However, we are traveling along here at 100 miles per hour. Can you visualize what would happen if this strip under us should break?
Mr. Blenkinsop shifted nervously in his chair.
Rather a disconcerting idea, don't you think? I mean to say, one is hardly aware that one is travelling at high speed here in this snug room. What would the result be?
Don't let it worry you. The strip can't part. It is built up of overlapping sections in such a fashion that it has a safety factor of better than 12 to 1.
Several miles of rotors would have to shut down all at once, and the circuit breakers for the rest of the line failed to trip out before there could possibly be sufficient tension on the strip to cause it to part. But it happened once on the Philadelphia-Jersey City Road, and we aren't likely to forget it. It was one of the earliest high-speed roads, carrying a tremendous passenger traffic, as well as heavy freight, since it serviced a heavily industrialized area. The strip was hardly more than a conveyor belt, and no one had foreseen the weight it would carry. It happened under maximum load, naturally, when the high speedway was crowded. The part of the strip behind the brake buckled for miles, crushing passengers against the roof at 80 miles an hour. The section forward of the brake cracked like a whip, spilling passengers onto the slower ways, dropping them on the exposed rollers and rotors down inside, and snapping them up against the roof. Over 3,000 people were killed in that one accident, and there was much agitation to abolish the roads. They were even shut down for a week by presidential order, but he was forced to reopen them again. There was no alternative.
Really? Why not?
The country had become economically dependent on the roads. They were the principal means of transportation in the industrial areas, the only means of economic importance. Factories were shut down, food didn't move, people got hungry, and the president was forced to let them roll again. It was the only thing that could be done. The social pattern had crystallized in one form, and it couldn't be changed overnight. A large industrialized population must have large-scale transportation, not only for people, but for trade. Mr. Blenkinsop fussed with his napkin, and rather diffidently suggested,
Mr. Gaines, I do not intend to disparage the ingenious accomplishment of your great people, but isn't it possible that you may have put too many eggs in one basket in allowing your whole country to become dependent on the functioning of one type of machinery?
Gaines considered this soberly. I see your point. Yes, and no. Every civilization above the peasant and village type is dependent on some key type of machinery. The Old South was based on the cotton gin. Imperial England was made possible by the steam engine. Large populations have to have machines for power, for transportation, and for manufacturing in order to live. Had it not been for machinery, the large populations could never have grown up. That's not a fault of the machine. That's its virtue. That's not a fault of the machine. That's its virtue. But it is true that whenever we develop machinery to the point where it will support large populations at a high standard of living, we are then bound to keep that machinery running, or suffer the consequences. But the real hazard in that is not the machinery, but the men who run the machinery. These roads, as machines, are all right. They are strong and safe, and will do everything they were designed to do. No, it's not the machines. It's the men. When a population is dependent on a machine, they are hostages of the men who tend the machines. If their morale is high, their sense of duty strong. Someone up near the front of the restaurant had turned up the volume control of the radio, letting out a blast of music that drowned out Gaines's words. When the sound had been tapered down to a more nearly bearable volume, he was saying, "Listen to that. It illustrates my point." Okay, so unfortunately, this bit is going to require me to sing. I don't have a problem with singing. I do have a problem in that I don't actually know how the tune The Roll of the Caissons goes. So we're going to mangle this and fake it. My apologies to anyone who actually knows how that particular song goes. Blenkinsop turned an ear to the music. It was a swinging march of compelling rhythm, with a modern interpretive arrangement. One could hear the roar of machinery, the repetitive clatter of mechanisms. A pleased smile of recognition spread over the Australian's face.
It's your field artillery. It's your field artillery song, "The Roll of the Caissons," isn't it?
I'm probably mispronouncing that.
But I don't see the connection.
You're right. It was the roll of the caissons, but we adapted it to our own purposes. It's the road song of the transport cadets, too. Wait! The persistent throb of the march continued, and seemed to blend with the vibration of the roadway underneath into a single timpano. Then a male chorus took up the verse. Hear them hum, watch them run. Oh, our job is never done, for our roadways go rolling along. While you ride, while you glide, we are watching down inside, so your roadways keep rolling along. Oh, it's hi, hi, he, the rotormen are we. Check off the sectors loud and strong. 1, 2, 3. Anywhere you go, you are bound to know that your roadways are rolling along. Keep them rolling, that your roadways are rolling along. See, said Gaines, with more animation in his voice. See, that is the real purpose of the United Academy of Transport. That is the reason why the transport engineers are a semi-military profession with strict discipline. We are the bottleneck, the sine qua non of all industry, all economic life. Other industries can go on strike and only create temporary and partial dislocations. Crops can fail here and there, and the country takes up the slack. But if the roads stop rolling, everything else must stop. The effect would be the same as a general strike, with this important difference. It takes a majority of the population, fired by a real feeling of grievance, to create a general strike, but the men that run the roads, few as they are, can create the same complete paralysis. We had just one strike on the roads back in '60. It was justified, I think, and it corrected a lot of real abuses. But it mustn't happen again.
But what is to prevent it happening again, Mr. Gaines?
Morale, esprit de corps. The technicians in the road service are indoctrinated constantly with the idea that their job is a sacred trust. Besides, we do everything we can to build up their social position. But even more important is the academy. We try to turn out graduate engineers imbued with the same loyalty, the same iron self-discipline, and determination to perform their duty to the community at any cost, that Annapolis and West Point and Goddard are so successful in inculcating in their graduates.
Goddard? Ah, yes, the rocket field. And have you been successful, do you think?
Not entirely, perhaps, but we will be. It takes time to build up a tradition. When the oldest engineer is a man who entered the academy in his teens, we can afford to relax a little and treat it as a solved problem.
I suppose you are a graduate?
Gaines grinned. You flatter me. I must look younger than I am. No, I'm a carryover from the Army. You see, the War Department operated the roads for some 3 months during the reorganization after the strike in '60. I served on the conciliation board that awarded pay increases and adjusted working conditions. Then I was assigned. The signal light of the portable telephone glowed red. Gaines said, "Excuse me," and picked up the handset. "Yes?"
Blenkinsop could overhear the voice at the other end. This is Davidson, Chief. The roads are rolling.
"Very well. Keep them rolling."
Had another trouble report from the Sacramento sector.
"Again? What this time?"
Before Davidson could reply, he was cut off. As Gaines reached out to dial him back, his coffee cup, half full, landed in his lap. Blenkinsop was aware, even as he was lurched against the edge of the table, of a disquieting change in the hum of the roadway. What has happened, Mr. Gaines?
"Don't know. Emergency stop. God knows why."
He was dialing furiously. Shortly, he flung the phone down, without bothering to return the handset to its cradle.
"Phones are out. Come on." "No, you'll be safe here. Wait."
Must I?
"Well, come along then, and stick close to me."
He turned away, having dismissed the Australian cabinet minister from his mind. The strip ground slowly to a rest, the giant rotors and myriad rollers acting as flywheels in preventing a disastrous sudden stop. Already a little knot of commuters, disturbed at their evening meal, were attempting to crowd out the door of the restaurant.
Halt! There is something about a command issued by one used to being obeyed which enforces compliance. It may be the intonation, or possibly a more esoteric power, such as animal tamers are reported to be able to exercise in controlling ferocious beasts, but it does exist and can be used to compel even those not habituated to obedience. The commuters stopped in their tracks. Gaines continued. Remain in the restaurant until we are ready to evacuate you. I am the chief engineer. You will be in no danger here. You! He pointed to a big fellow near the door. You're deputized. Don't let anyone leave without proper authority. Mrs. McCoy, resume serving dinner. If you are familiar with Heinlein, you're going to hear some fairly familiar notes, or have already heard some fairly familiar notes. I will not say the I will not comment. Either way. Gaines strode out the door, Blenkinsop tagging along. The situation outside permitted no such simple measures. The 100-mile strip alone had stopped. 20 feet away, the next strip flew by at an unchecked 95 miles an hour. The passengers on it flickered past, unreal cardboard figures. The 20-foot walkway of the maximum speed strip had been crowded when the breakdown occurred. Now the customers of shops, of lunch stands, and of other places of business, the occupants of lounges, of television theaters, all came crowding out onto the walkway to see what had happened. The first disaster struck almost immediately. The crowd surged and pushed against a middle-aged woman on its outer edge. In attempting to recover her balance, she put one foot over the edge of the flashing 95-mile strip. She realized her gruesome error, for she screamed before her foot touched the ribbon. She spun around and landed heavily on the moving strip, and was rolled by it, as the strip attempted to impart to her mass, at one blow, a velocity of 95 miles per hour, 139 feet per second. As she rolled, she mowed down some of the cardboard figures as a sickle strikes a stand of grass. Quickly she was out of sight, her identity, her injuries, and her fate undetermined, and already remote. But the consequences of her mishap were not done with. One of the flickering cardboard figures, bowled over by her relative moment, fell toward the 100-mile strip, slammed into the shock-bound crowd, and suddenly appeared as a live man, but broken and bleeding, amidst the luckless, fallen victims whose bodies had checked his wild flight. Even there it did not end. The disaster spread from its source, each hapless human ninepin more likely than not to knock down others so that they fell over the danger-laden boundary, and in turn ricocheted to a dearly bought equilibrium. But the focus of calamity sped out of sight, and Blenkinsop could see no more. His active mind, accustomed to dealing with large numbers of individual human beings, multiplied the tragic sequence he had witnessed by 1,200 miles of thronged conveyor strip, and his stomach chilled. To Blenkinsop's surprise, Gaines made no effort to succor the fallen, nor to quell the fear-infected mob, but turned an expressionless face back to the restaurant. When Blenkinsop saw that he was actually re-entering the restaurant, he plucked at Gaines's sleeve. "Aren't we going to help those poor people?" The cold planes of the face of the man who answered him bore no resemblance to his genial, rather boyish host of a few minutes before. "No, bystanders can help them. I've got the whole road to think of. Don't bother me." Crushed and somewhat indignant, the politician did as he was ordered. Rationally, he knew that the chief engineer was right. A man responsible for the safety of millions cannot turn aside from his duty to render personal service to one. But the cold detachment of such viewpoint was repugnant to him. Gaines was back in the restaurant. Mrs. McCoy, where is your getaway?
In the pantry, sir.
Gaines hurried there, Blenkinsop at his heels. A nervous Filipino salad boy shrank out of Gaines's way as he casually swept a supply of prepared greenstuffs onto the floor and stepped up on the counter where they had rested. Directly above his head and within reach was a circular manhole, counterweighted and operated by a hand wheel set in its center. A short steel ladder, hinged to the edge of the opening, was swung up flat to the ceiling and secured by a hook. Blenkinsop lost his hat in the endeavor to clamber quickly enough up the ladder after Gaines. When he emerged on the roof of the building, Gaines was searching the ceiling of the roadway with a pocket flashlight. He was shuffling along, stooped double in the awkward 4 feet of space between the roof underfoot and ceiling. He found what he sought some 50 feet away, another manhole similar to the one they had used to escape from below. He spun the wheel of the lock and stood up in the space, then rested his hands on the sides of the opening, and with a single lithe movement vaulted to the roof of the roadways. His companion followed him with more difficulty. They stood in darkness, a fine cold rain feeling at their faces. But underfoot, and stretching beyond sight on each hand, the sun power screens glowed with a faint opalescent radiance, their slight percentage of inefficiency as transformers of radiant sun power to available electrical power being evidenced as a mild induced radioactivity. Oh, that seems healthy to be around. The effect was not illumination, but rather like the ghostly sheen of a snow-covered plain seen by starlight. The glow picked out the path they must follow to reach the rain-obscured wall of buildings bordering the ways. The path was a narrow black stripe which arched away into the darkness over the low curve of the roof. They started away on this path at a dog trot, making as much speed as the slippery footing and the dark permitted, while Blenkinsop's mind still fretted at the problem of Gaines's apparently callous detachment. Although possessed of a keen intelligence, his nature was dominated by a warm, human sympathy, without which no politician, irrespective of other virtues or shortcomings, is long successful. Because of this trait, he distrusted instinctively any mind which was guided by logic alone. He was aware that, from a standpoint of strict logic, no reasonable case could be made out for the continued existence of the human race, still less for the human values he served. Had he been able to pierce the preoccupation of his companion, he would have been reassured. On the surface, Gaines's exceptionally intelligent mind was clicking along with the facile ease of an electromechanical integrator, arranging data at hand, making tentative decisions, postponing judgments without prejudice until necessary data were available, exploring alternatives. Underneath, in a compartment insulated by stern self-discipline from the acting theater of his mind, his emotions were a torturing storm of self-reproach. He was heartsick at the suffering he had seen, and which he knew too well was duplicated up and down the line. Although he was not aware of any personal omission, nevertheless the fault was somehow his, for authority creates responsibility. He had carried too long the superhuman burden of kingship, which no sane mind can carry light-heartedly, and was at this moment perilously close to the frame of mind which sends captains down with their ships. But the need for immediate constructive action sustained him. But no trace of this conflict reached his features. At the wall of buildings glowed a green line of arrows, pointing to the left. Over them, at the terminus of the narrow path, shone a sign, "Access down." They pursued this, Blenkinsop puffing in Gaines's wake, to a door let in the wall, which gave into a narrow stairway lighted by a single glow tube.
Gaines plunged down this, still followed, and they emerged on the crowded, noisy, stationary walkway adjoining the northbound road. Immediately adjacent to their stairway, on the right, was a public telebooth. Through the glassite door they could see a portly, well-dressed man speaking earnestly to his female equivalent, mirrored in the visor screen. 3 other citizens were waiting outside the booth. Gaines pushed past them, flung open the door, grasped the bewildered and indignant man by the shoulders, and hustled him outside, kicking the door closed after him. He cleared the visor screen with one sweep of his hand, before the matron pictured therein could protest, and pressed the emergency priority button. He dialed his private code number, and was shortly looking into the troubled face of his engineer of the watch, Davidson. "Report." "It's you, Chief. Thank God. Where are you?" Davidson's relief was pathetic. "Report!" The senior watch officer repressed his emotion and complied in direct, clipped phrases. "At 7:09 p.m., the consolidated tension reading, strip 20, Sacramento sector, climbed suddenly. Before action could be taken, tension on strip 20 passed emergency level. The interlocks acted, and power to subject strip cut out. Cause of failure unknown. Direct communication to Sacramento Control Office has failed. They do not answer the auxiliary nor commercial. Effort to reestablish communication continues. Messenger dispatched from Stockton Subsector 10. No casualties reported. Warning broadcast by public announcement circuit to keep clear of Strip 19. Evacuation has commenced." "There are casualties," Gaines cut in. "Police and hospital emergency routine. Move!" "Yes, sir!" Davidson snapped back, and hooked a thumb over his shoulder, but his cadet officer of the watch had already jumped to comply. "Shall I cut out the rest of the road, Chief?" "No. No more casualties are likely after the first disorder. Keep up the broadcast warnings. Keep those other strips rolling, or we will have a traffic jam the devil himself couldn't untangle." Gaines had in mind the impossibility of bringing the strips up to speed under load. The rotors were not powerful enough to do this. If the entire road was stopped, he would have to evacuate every strip, correct the trouble on strip 20, bring all strips up to speed, and then move the accumulated peak load traffic. In the meantime, over 5 million stranded passengers would constitute a tremendous police problem. It was simpler to evacuate passengers on strip 20 over the roof and allow them to return home via the remaining strips. "Notify the mayor and the governor that I have assumed emergency authority. Same to the chief of police, and place him under your orders. Tell the commandant to arm all cadets available and await orders. Move." "Yes, sir. Shall I recall technicians off watch?" "No. This isn't an engineering failure. Take a look at your readings. That entire sector went out simultaneously. Somebody cut out those rotors by hand. Place off-watch technicians on standby status. But don't arm them, and don't send them down inside. Tell the commandant to rush all available senior class cadets to Stockton Subsector Office Number 10 to report to me. I want them equipped with tumblebugs, pistols, and sleep gas bombs." "Yes, sir." A clerk leaned over Davidson's shoulder and said something in his ear. "The governor wants to talk to you, Chief." "Can't do it. Nor can you. Who's your relief? Have you sent for him?" "Hubbard. He's just come in." "Have him talk to the governor, the mayor, the press, anybody that calls. Even the White House. You stick to your watch. I'm cutting off. I'll be back in communication as quickly as I can locate a reconnaissance car." He was out of the booth almost before the screen cleared. Took a while to get rolling, haha, but now the story really has wheels. Blenkinsop did not venture to speak, but followed him out to the northbound 20-mile strip. Where Gaines stopped short of the windbreak,
There, Gaines stopped, short of the windbreak, turned, and kept his eyes on the wall beyond the stationary walkway. He picked out some landmark or sign, not apparent to his companion, and did an Eliza crossing the ice back to the what? And did an Eliza crossing the ice back to the walkway, so rapidly that Blenkinsop was carried some 100 feet beyond him, and almost failed to follow when Gaines ducked into a doorway and ran down a flight of stairs. They came out on a narrow lower walkway, down inside. The pervading din claimed them, beat upon their bodies as well as their ears. Dimly, Blenkinsop perceived their surroundings as he struggled to face that wall of sound. Facing him, illuminated by the red monochrome of a neon arc, was one of the rotors that drove the 5-mile strip, its great drum-shaped armature revolving slowly around the stationary field coils in its core. The upper surface of the drum pressed against the underside of the moving way and imparted to it its stately progress. To the left and right, 100 yards each way, and beyond at similar intervals, farther than he could see, were other rotors. Bridging the gaps between the rotors were slender rollers, crowded together like cigars in a box, in order that the strip might have a continuous rolling support. The rollers were supported by steel girder arches, through the gaps of which he saw row after row of rotors in staggered succession, the rotors in each succeeding row turning over more rapidly than the last. Separated from the narrow walkway by a line of supporting steel pillars, and lying parallel to it, on the side away from the rotors, ran a shallow paved causeway, joined to the walk at this point by a ramp. Gaines peered up and down this tunnel in evident annoyance. Blenkinsop started to ask him what troubled him, but found his voice snuffed out by the sound. He could not cut through the roar of thousands of rotors and the whine of hundreds of thousands of rollers. Gaines saw his lips move, and guessed at the question. He cupped his hands around Blenkinsop's right ear and shouted, "No car! I expected to find a car here!" The Australian, wishing to be helpful, grasped Gaines's arm and pointed back into the jungle of machinery. Gaines's eye followed the direction indicated and picked out something that he had missed in his preoccupation. A half-dozen men working around a rotor several strips away. They had jacked down a rotor until it was no longer in contact with the road surface, and were preparing to replace it in toto. The replacement rotor was standing by on a low, heavy truck. The chief engineer gave a quick smile of acknowledgment and thanks, and aimed his flashlight at the group. The beam focused down to a slender, intense needle of light. One of the technicians looked up, and Gaines snapped the light on and off in a repeated, irregular pattern. A figure detached itself from the group and ran toward them. It was a slender young man, dressed in dungarees, and topped off with ear pads and an incongruous pillbox cap, bright with gold braid and insignia. He recognized the chief engineer and saluted, his face falling into humorless, boyish intentness. Gaines stuffed his torch into a pocket and commenced to gesticulate rapidly with both hands, clear, clean gestures, as involved and as meaningful as deaf-mute language. Blenkinsop dug into his own dilettante knowledge of anthropology and decided it was most likely an American Indian Sign Language, with some of the finger movements of hula. But it was necessarily almost entirely strange, being adapted for a particular terminology. The cadet answered him in kind, stepped to the edge of the causeway, and flashed his torch to the south. He picked out a car, still some distance away, but approaching at headlong speed. It braked and came to a stop alongside them. It was a small affair, ovoid in shape, and poised on two center-line wheels. The forward, upper surface swung up and disclosed the driver, another cadet. Gaines addressed him briefly in sign language, then hustled Blenkinsop ahead of him into the cramped passenger compartment.
As the glassite hood was being swung back into place, the blast of wind smote them. A blast of wind smote them, and the Australian looked up in time to glimpse the last of three much larger vehicles hurtle past them. They were headed north, at a speed of not less than 200 miles per hour. Blenkinsop thought that he had made out the little hats of cadets through the windows of the last of the three, but he could not be sure. He had no time to wonder, so violent was the driver's getaway. Gaines ignored the accelerating surge. He was already calling Davidson on the built-in communicator. Comparative silence had settled down once the car was closed. The face of a female operator at the relay station showed on the screen. "Get me Davidson, Senior Watch Office."
"Oh, it's Mr. Gaines. The mayor wants to talk to you, Mr. Gaines."
"Refer him, and get me Davidson. Move."
"Yes, sir."
"And see here, leave this circuit hooked into Davidson's board until I tell you personally to cut it."
"Right."
Her face gave way to the watch officer's.
"That you, Chief? We're moving. Progress okay. No change."
"Very well. You'll be able to raise me on this circuit or at Subsector 10 office. Clearing now."
Davidson's face gave way to the relay operator.
"Your wife is calling, Mr. Gaines. Will you take it?"
Gaines muttered something not quite gallant, and answered, "Yes." Mrs. Gaines flashed into facsimile. He burst into speech before she could open her mouth. "Darling, I'm all right. Don't worry. I'll be home when I get there. I've got to go now." Then it was all out. It was all out in one breath, and he slapped the control that cleared the screen. They slammed to a breathtaking stop along the stair leading to the watch office of Subsector 10 and piled out. Three big lorries were drawn up on the ramp, and three platoons of cadets were ranged in restless ranks alongside them. Tumblebugs, small open monocycles, used to patrol down inside, were ready nearby. A cadet trotted up to Gaines and saluted.
"Lindsay, sir, Cadet Engineer of the Watch. The Engineer of the Watch requests that you come at once to the control room."
The engineer of the watch looked up as they came in.
"Chief, Van Cleek is calling you."
"Put him on." When Van Cleek appeared in the big visor, Gaines greeted him with, "Hello, Van. Where are you?" "Sacramento office."
"Now listen."
"Sacramento? That's good. Report."
Van Cleek looked disgruntled.
"Report hell. I'm not your deputy anymore, Gaines. Now you—"
"What the hell are you talking about?"
"Listen and don't interrupt me and you'll find out. You're through, Gaines. I've been picked as director of the Provisional Control Committee for the New Order."
"Van, have you gone off your rocker? What do you mean, the New Order?"
"You'll find out. This is it. The Functionalist Revolution. We're in, you're out. We stopped Strip 20 just to give you a little taste of what we can do."
Concerning Function. A treatise on the natural order in society, the Bible of the functionalist movement, was first published in 1930. It claimed to be a scientifically accurate theory of social relations. The author, Paul Decker, disclaimed the outworn and futile ideas of democracy and human equality and substituted a system in which human beings were evaluated functionally, that is to say, by the role each filled in the economic sequence. The underlying thesis was that it was right and proper for a man to exercise over his fellows whatever power was inherent in his function, and that any other form of social organization was silly, visionary, and contrary to the natural order. The complete interdependence of modern economic life seems to have escaped him entirely. His ideas were dressed up with a glib mechanistic pseudo-psychology based on the observed orders of precedence among barnyard fowls, and on the famous Pavlov-conditioned reflex experiments on dogs. He failed to note that human beings are neither dogs nor chickens. Old Dr. Pavlov ignored him entirely, as he had ignored so many others who had blindly and unscientifically dogmatized about the meaning of his important, but strictly limited, experiments. Functionalism did not take hold at once. During the 30s, almost everyone, from truck driver to hat check girl, had a scheme for setting the world right in 6 easy lessons, and a surprising percentage managed to get their schemes published. But it gradually spread. Functionalism was particularly popular among little people everywhere who could persuade themselves that their particular jobs were the indispensable ones, and that therefore, under the natural order, they would be top dogs. With so many different functions actually indispensable, such self-persuasion was easy. Gaines stared at Van Cleek for a moment before replying. Van, he said slowly, you don't really think you can get away with this, do you?
The little man puffed out his chest. Why not? We have gotten away with it. You can't start strip 20 until I am ready to let you, and I can stop the whole road if necessary.
Gaines was becoming uncomfortably aware that he was dealing with an unreasonable conceit, and held himself patiently in check. Sure you can, Van, but how about the rest of the country? Do you think the United States Army will sit quietly by and let you run California as your private kingdom? Van Cleek looked sly.
I've planned for that. I've just finished broadcasting a manifesto to all the road technicians in the country, telling them what we have done, and telling them to arise and claim their rights. With every road in the country stopped and people getting hungry, I reckon the president will think twice before sending the army to tangle with us. Oh, he could send a force to capture or kill me. I'm not afraid to die, but he doesn't dare start shooting down road technicians as a class because the country can't get along without us. Consequently, he'll have to get along with us on our terms.
There was much bitter truth in what he said. If an uprising of the road technicians became general, the government could no more attempt to settle it by force than a man could afford to cure a headache by blowing out his brains. But was the uprising general? Why do you think that the technicians in the rest of the country will follow your lead?
Why not? It's the natural order of things. This is an age of machinery. The real power everywhere is in the technicians, but they have been kidded into not using their power with a lot of obsolete catchphrases. And of all the classes of technicians, the most important, the absolutely essential, are the road technicians. From now on, they run the show. It's the natural order of things.
He turned away for a moment and fussed with some papers on the desk before him. Then he added,
That's all for now, Gaines. I've got to call the White House and let the president know how things stand. You carry on and behave yourself, and you won't get hurt.
Gaines sat quite still for some minutes after the screen cleared. So that's how it was. He wondered what effect, if any, Van Cleek's invitation to strike had had on road technicians elsewhere. None, he thought. But then he had not dreamed that it could happen among his own technicians. Perhaps he had made a mistake in refusing to take time to talk to anyone outside the road. No, if he had stopped to talk to the governor or the newspaperman, he would still be talking. Still. He dialed to Davidson. Any trouble in other sectors, Dave?
No, Chief.
Or on any other road?
None reported.
Did you hear my talk with Van Cleek?
I was cut in, yes.
Good. Have Hubbard call the president and the governor and tell them I am strongly opposed to the use of military force as long as the outbreak is limited to this one road. Tell them that I will not be responsible if they move in before I ask for help.
Davidson looked dubious. You think that is wise, Chief?
I do. If we try to blast Van and his Red Hots out of their position, we may set off a real countrywide uprising. Furthermore, he could wreck the road so that God himself couldn't put it back together. What's your rolling tonnage now?
53% under evening peak.
How about strip 20?
Almost evacuated.
Good. Get the road clear of all traffic as fast as possible. Better have the chief of police place a guard on all entrances to the road to keep out new traffic. Van may stop all the strips any time, or I may need to myself. Here is my plan. I'm going down inside with these armed cadets. We will work north, overcoming any resistance we meet. You arrange for watch technicians and maintenance crews to follow immediately behind us. Each rotor, as they come to it, is to be cut out, then hooked into the Stockton control board. It will be a haywire rig with no safety interlocks, so use enough watch technicians to be able to catch trouble before it happens. If this scheme works, we can move control of the Sacramento sector right out from under Van's feet, and he can stay in his Sacramento control office until he gets hungry enough to be reasonable. He cut off and turned to the subsector engineer of the watch. Edmonds, give me a helmet and a pistol. Yes, sir. He opened a drawer and handed his chief a slender, deadly-looking weapon. Gaines belted it on, accepted a helmet, into which he crammed his head, leaving the anti-noise ear flaps up. Blenkinsop cleared his throat.
May I have one of those helmets? He inquired.
What? Gaines focused his attention. Oh, you won't need one, Mr. Blenkinsop. I want you to remain right here until you hear from me.
But
The Australian statesman started to speak, though thought better of it, and subsided. From the doorway, the cadet engineer of the watch demanded the chief engineer's attention.
Mr. Gaines, there's a technician out here who insists on seeing you, a man named Harvey.
Can't do it.
He's from the Sacramento sector, sir.
Oh, send him in. Harvey quickly advised Gaines of what he had seen and heard at the guild meeting that afternoon.
I got disgusted and left while they were still jawing, Chief. I didn't think any more about it until Strip 20 stopped rolling. Then I heard the trouble was in Sacramento sector and decided to look you up.
How long has this been building up?
Quite some time, I guess. You know how it is. There are a few soreheads everywhere, and a lot of them are functionalists. But you can't refuse to work with a man just because he holds different political views. It's a free country.
You should have come to me before, Harvey. Harvey looked stubborn. Gaines studied his face. No, I guess you're right. It's my business to keep tabs on your mates, not yours. As you say, it's a free country. Anything else?
Well, now that it has come to this, I thought maybe I could help you pick out the ringleaders.
Thanks. You stick with me. We're going down inside and try and clear up this mess. The office door opened suddenly, and a technician and a cadet appeared, lugging a burden between them. They deposited it on the floor and waited. It was a young man, quite evidently dead. The front of his dungaree jacket was soggy with blood. Gaines looked at the watch officer. Who is he? Edmonds broke his stare and answered.
Cadet Hughes. He's the messenger I sent to Sacramento when communication failed. When he didn't report, I sent Marston and Cadet Jenkins after him.
And here we've got a subtitle for this cute image. Gaines shook his head mutely. It was impossible to hear the visitor's question in the unending roar of machinery here under the roads. Gaines muttered something to himself and turned away. Come along, Harvey. The cadets waiting below had changed in mood. Gaines noted that the boyish intentness for excitement had been replaced by something uglier. There was much exchange of hand signals, and several appeared to be checking the loading of their pistols. He sized them up, then signaled to the cadet leader. There was a short interchange of signals. The cadet saluted, turned to his men, gesticulated briefly, and brought his arm down smartly. They filed upstairs and into an empty standby room, Gaines following. Once inside, and the noise shut out, he addressed them. You saw Hughes brought in. How many of you want a chance to kill the louse that did it? 3 of the cadets reacted almost at once, breaking ranks and striding forward. Gaines looked at them coldly. Very well. You 3 turn in your weapons and return to your quarters. Any of the rest of you that think this is a matter of private revenge, or a hunting party, may join them. He permitted a short silence to endure before continuing. Sacramento sector has been seized by unauthorized persons. We are going to retake it, if possible, without the loss of life on either side, and, if possible, without stopping the roads. The plan is to take over down inside, rotor by rotor, and cross-connect through Stockton. The task assignment of this group is to proceed north down inside, locating and overpowering all persons in your path. You will bear in mind the probability that most of the persons you will arrest are completely innocent. Consequently, you will favor the use of sleep gas bombs, and will shoot to kill only as a last resort. Cadet Captain, assign your men in squads of 10 each, with squad leader. Each squad is to form a skirmish line across down inside, mounted on tumblebugs, and will proceed north at 15 miles per hour. Leave an interval of 100 yards between successive waves of skirmishers. Whenever a man is sighted, the entire leading wave will converge on him, arrest him, and deliver him to a transport car, then reform in the rear of the last wave. You will assign the transports you will assign the transports that delivered you here to hold prisoners. Instruct the drivers to keep abreast of the second wave. You will assign an attack group to recapture subsector control offices, but no office is to be attacked until its subsector has been cross-connected with Stockton. Arrange liaison accordingly. Any questions? He let his eyes run over the faces of the young men. When no one spoke up, he turned back to the cadet in charge. Very well, sir. Carry out your orders. By the time the dispositions had been completed, the follow-up crew of technicians had arrived, and Gaines had given the engineer in charge his instructions. The cadets stood to horse alongside their poised tumblebugs. The cadet captain looked expectantly at Gaines. He nodded. The cadet brought his arm down smartly, and the first wave mounted and moved off. Gaines and Harvey mounted tumblebugs and kept abreast of the cadet captain, some 25 yards behind the leading wave. It had been a long time since the chief engineer had ridden one of these silly-looking little vehicles, and he felt awkward. A tumblebug does not give a man dignity, since it is about the size and shape of a kitchen stool, gyro-stabilized on a single wheel. But it is perfectly adapted to patrolling the maze of machinery down inside, since it can go through an opening the width of a man's shoulders, is easily controlled, and will stand patiently upright, waiting should its rider dismount. The little reconnaissance car followed Gaines at a short interval, weaving in and out among the road. Oh, excuse me. Weaving in and out among the rotors, while the television and audio communicator inside continued as Gaines's link to the other manifold to his other manifold responsibilities. Oh, one sec. I have a door call. One sec. about that. Let's see, where are we? Right at the link to his other manifold responsibilities, I think. The little reconnaissance car followed Gaines at a short interval, weaving in and out among the rotors, while the television and audio communicator inside continued as Gaines's link to his other manifold responsibilities. The first 200 yards of Sacramento sector passed without incident. Then one of the skirmishers sighted a tumblebug parked by a rotor. The technician it served was checking the gauges at the rotor's base and did not see them approach. He was unarmed and made no resistance, but seemed surprised and indignant, as well as very bewildered. The little command group dropped back and permitted the new leading wave to overtake them. 3 miles farther along the score stood 37 men arrested, none killed. 2 of the cadets had received minor wounds and had been directed to retire. Only 4 of the prisoners had been armed. One of these Harvey had been able to identify as a ringleader. Harvey expressed a desire to attempt to parley with the outlaws if any occasion arose. Gaines agreed tentatively. He knew of Harvey's long and honorable record as a labor leader, and was willing to try anything that offered a hope of success with a minimum of violence. Shortly thereafter, the first wave flushed another technician. He was on the far side of a rotor. They were almost on him before he was seen. He did not attempt to resist, although he was armed, and the incident would not have been worth recording had he not been talking into a hushaphone which he had plugged into the telephone jack at the base of the rotor. Gaines reached the group as the capture was being effected. He snatched at the soft rubber mask of the phone, jerking it away from the man's mouth so violently that he could feel the bone conduction receiver grate between the man's teeth. The prisoner spat out a piece of broken tooth and glared, but ignored attempts to question him. Swift as Gaines had been, it was highly probable that they had lost the advantage of surprise. It was necessary to assume that the prisoner had succeeded in reporting the attack going on beneath the ways. Word was passed down the line to proceed with increased caution.
Not a package this time. It was somebody asking about something that's happening later this coming week. Somebody who should be talking to the actual proper building manager of my apartment complex, who is I have not seen once
Because I'm doing their job, kind of, sort of, for certain things.
We're not talking about that now. It's political drama. Let's put it that way. It's political drama. I'm not getting into it today.
Gaines's pessimism was justified shortly. Riding toward them appeared a group of men, as yet several hundred feet away. There were at least a score, but their exact strength could not be determined, as they took advantage of the rotors for cover as they advanced. Harvey looked at Gaines, who nodded and signaled the cadet captain to halt his forces. Harvey went on ahead, unarmed, his hands held high above his head, and steering by balancing the weight of his body. The outlaw party checked its speed uncertainly, and finally stopped. Harvey approached within a couple of rods of them, and stopped likewise. One of them, apparently the leader, spoke to him in sign language, to which he replied. They were too far away, and the red light too uncertain, to follow the discussion. It continued for several minutes, then ensued a pause. The leader seemed uncertain what to do. One of his party rolled forward, returned his pistol to its holster, and conversed with the leader. The leader shook his head at the man's violent gestures. The man renewed his argument, but met the same negative response. With a final disgusted wave of his hands, he desisted, drew his pistol, and shot at Harvey. Harvey grabbed at his middle and leaned forward. The man shot again. Harvey jerked and slid to the ground. The cadet captain beat Gaines to the draw. The killer looked up as the bullet hit him. He looked as if he were puzzled by some strange occurrence, being too freshly dead to be aware of it. The cadets came in shooting.
Although the first wave was outnumbered better than 2-1, they were helped by the comparative demoralization of the enemy. The odds were nearly even after the first ragged volley. Less than less than 30 seconds after the first treacherous shot, all of the insurgent party were dead, wounded, or under arrest. Gaines's losses were 2 dead, including the murder of Harvey, and 2 wounded. Gaines modified his tactics to suit the changed conditions. Now that secrecy was gone, speed and striking power were of first importance. The second wave was directed to close in practically to the heels of the first. The third wave was brought up to within 25 yards of the second. These 3 waves were to ignore unarmed men, leaving them to be picked up by the fourth wave, but they were directed to shoot on sight any person carrying arms. Gaines cautioned them to shoot to wound rather than to kill, but he realized that his admonishment was almost impossible to obey. There would be killing. Well, he had not wanted it, but he felt. Oh my goodness, I should have closed my door to keep out the cuckoos. Well, he had not wanted it, but he felt that he had no choice. Any armed outlaw was a potential killer. He could not, in fairness to his own men, lay too many restrictions on them. When the arrangements for the new marching order were completed, he signed the cadet captain to go ahead, and the first and second waves started off together at the top speed of which the tumblebugs were capable, not quite 18 miles an hour. Gaines followed them. He swerved to avoid Harvey's body, glancing involuntarily down as he did so. The face was set in a death mask of rugged beauty in which the strong fiber of the dead man's character was evident. Seeing this, Gaines did not regret so much his order to shoot, but the deep sense of loss of personal honor lay more heavily on him than before. They passed several technicians during the next few minutes, but had no occasion to shoot. Gaines was beginning to feel somewhat hopeful of a reasonably bloodless victory when he noticed a change in the pervading throb of machinery which penetrated even through the heavy anti-noise pads of his helmet. He lifted an ear pad in time to hear the end of a rumbling diminuendo as the rotors and rollers slowed to rest. The road was stopped. He shouted to the cadet captain, "Halt your men!" His words echoed hollowly in the unreal silence. The top of the reconnaissance car swung up as he turned and hurried to it. "Chief!" the cadet within called out. "Relay station calling you!" The girl in the visor screen gave way to Davidson as soon as she recognized Gaines's face. "Chief!" Davidson said at once. "Van Cleek's calling you."
Who stopped the road?
"He did."
Any other major change in the situation?
"No, the road was practically empty when he stopped it."
Good. Give me Van Cleek.
The chief conspirator's face was livid with uncurbed anger when he identified Gaines. He burst into speech. "So, you thought I was fooling, eh? What do you think now, Mr. Chief Engineer Gaines?" Gaines fought down an impulse to tell him exactly what he thought, particularly about Van Cleek. Everything about the short man's manner affected him like a squeaking slate pencil. But he could not afford the luxury of speaking his mind. He strove to get just the proper tone into his voice which would soothe the other man's vanity.
I've got to admit that you've won this trick, Van. The road is stopped, but don't think I didn't take you seriously. I've watched you work too long to underrate you. I know you mean what you say.
Van Cleek was pleased by the tribute, but tried not to show it. "Then why don't you get smart and give up?" he demanded belligerently. "You can't win."
Maybe not, Van, but you know I've got to try. Besides, he went on, why can't I win? You said yourself that I could call on the whole United States Army.
Van Cleek grinned triumphantly. You see that? He held up a pear-shaped electric push button attached to a long cord. If I push that, it will blow a path right straight across the... Bleh. If I push that, it will blow a path right straight across the ways. Blow it to Kingdom Come. And just for good measure, I'll take an axe and wreck this control station before I leave. Gaines wished wholeheartedly that he knew more about psychology. Well, he'd just have to do his best and trust to horse sense to give him the right answers. That's pretty drastic, Van, but I don't see how we can give up.
No, you'd better have another think. If you force me to blow up that road, how about all the people that will be blown up along with it?
Gaines thought furiously. He did not doubt that Van Cleek would carry out his threat. His very phraseology, the childish petulance of, "If you force me to do this," betrayed the dangerous irrationality of his frame of mind. And such an explosion anywhere in the thickly populated Sacramento sector would be likely to wreck one or more apartment houses, and would be certain to kill shopkeepers on the included segment of Strip 20, as well as the chance passers-by. Van was absolutely right. He dare not risk the lives of bystanders who were not aware of the issue and had not consented to the hazard, even if the road never rolled again. For that matter, he did not relish chancing major damage to the road itself, but it was the danger to innocent life which left him helpless. A tune ran through his head. Hear them hum, watch them run, oh, our work is never done. What to do? What to do? While you ride, while you glide, we are... This wasn't getting any place. He turned back to the screen. Look, Van, you don't want to blow up the road unless you have to. I'm sure. Neither do I. Suppose I come up to your headquarters and we talk this thing over. 2 reasonable men ought to be able to make a settlement. Van Cleek was suspicious.
Is this some sort of trick?
How can it be? I'll come alone and unarmed, just as fast as my car can get there.
How about your men?
They will sit where they are until I'm back. You can put out observers to make sure of it. Van Cleek stalled for a moment, caught between the fear of a trap and the pleasure of having his erstwhile superior come to him to sue for terms. At last he grudgingly consented. Gaines left his instructions and told Davidson what he intended to do. If I'm not back within an hour, you're on your own, Dave.
Be careful, Chief.
I will. He evicted the cadet driver from the reconnaissance car and ran it down the ramp into the causeway, then headed north and gave it the gun. Now he would have a chance to collect his thoughts, even at 200 miles per hour. Suppose he pulled off this trick. There would still have to be some changes made. 2 lessons stood out like sore thumbs. First, the strips must be cross-connected with safety interlocks so that adjacent strips would slow down, or stop, if a strip's speed became dangerously different from those adjacent. No repetition of what happened on 20. But that was elementary, a mere mechanical detail. I'd say it's a bit more than that if your entire infrastructure hasn't been built to deal with that, but never mind. But that was elementary, a mere mechanical detail. The real failure had been in men. Well, the psychological classification tests must be improved to ensure that the roads employed only conscientious, reliable men. But hell's bells! That was just exactly what the present classification tests were supposed to ensure beyond question. To the best of his knowledge, there had never been a failure from the improved Hum-Wadsworth-Burton method, not until today in the Sacramento sector. How had Van Cleek gotten one whole sector of How had Van Cleek gotten one whole sector of temperament-classified men to revolt? It didn't make sense. Personnel did not behave erratically without a reason. One man might be unpredictable, but in large numbers, personnel were as dependable as machines or figures. They could be measured, examined, classified. His inner eye automatically pictured the personnel office with its rows of filing cabinets, its clerks. He'd got it! He'd got it! Van Cleek, as chief deputy, was ex officio personnel officer for the entire road. It was the only solution that covered all the facts. The personnel officer alone had the perfect opportunity to pick out all the bad apples and concentrate them in one barrel. Gaines was convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that there had been skullduggery, perhaps for years, with the temperament classification tests, and that Van Cleek had deliberately transferred the kind of men he needed to one sector after falsifying their records. And that taught another lesson: tighter tests for officers, and no officer to be trusted with classification and assignment without close supervision and an inspection. Even he, Gaines, should be watched in that respect. Qui custodiet ipsos custodes. Who will guard those self-same guardians? Latin might be obsolete, but those old Romans weren't dummies. He at last knew wherein he had failed, and he derived melancholy pleasure from the knowledge. Supervision and inspection, check and recheck, was the answer. It would be cumbersome and inefficient, but it seemed that adequate safeguards always involved some loss of efficiency. He should not have He should not have entrusted so much authority to Van Cleek without knowing more about him. He still should know more about him. He touched the emergency stop button and brought the car to a dizzying halt. "Relay station. See if you can raise my office." Dolores' face looked out from the screen. "You're still there. Good," he told her. I was afraid you'd gone home." "I came back, Mr. Gaines."
"Good girl. Get me Van Cleek's personal file jacket. I want to see his classification record."
She was back with it in exceptionally short order, and read from it the symbols and percentages. He nodded repeatedly as the data checked his hunches. Masked introvert, inferiority complex. It checked. I feel attacked.
Comment of the board.
Comment of the board, she read. In spite of the slight potential instability shown by maxima A and D on the consolidated profile curve, the board is convinced that this officer is, nevertheless, fitted for duty. He has an exceptionally fine record and is especially adept in handling men. He is, therefore, recommended for retention and promotion.
That's all, Dolores. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Gaines.
I'm off for a showdown. Keep your fingers crossed.
But, Mr. Gaines... Back in Fresno, Dolores stared wide-eyed at an empty screen. Kidding about the inferiority complex.
Take me to Mr. Van Cleek.
The man addressed took his gun out of Gaines's ribs. Reluctantly, Gaines thought, and indicated that the chief engineer should precede him up the stairs. Gaines climbed out of the car and complied. Van Cleek had set himself up in the sector control room proper, rather than the administrative office. With him were half a dozen men, all armed.
Good evening, Director Van Cleek."
The little man swelled visibly at Gaines' acknowledgment of his assumed rank. "We don't go in much around here for titles," he said, with ostentatious casualness. "Just call me Van. Sit down, Gaines." Gaines did so. It was necessary to get those other men out. He looked at them with an expression of bored amusement.
"Can't you handle one unarmed man by yourself, Van? Or don't the functionalists trust each other?"
Van Cleek's face showed his annoyance, but Gaines's smile was undaunted. Finally, the smaller man picked up a pistol from his desk and motioned toward the door. "Get out, you guys."
But Van, get out, I said."
When they were alone, Van Cleek picked up the electric push button which Gaines had seen in the visor screen and pointed his pistol at his former chief.
Okay, he growled. Try any funny stuff and off it goes. What's your proposition?
Gaines's irritating smile grew broader. Van Cleek scowled.
What's so damn funny?
He said. Gaines granted him an answer. You are, Van. You are, Van. Honest, this is rich. You start a functionalist revolution, and the only function you can think of to perform is to blow up the road that justifies your title. Tell me, he went on, what is it you are so scared of?
I'm not afraid.
Not afraid? You? Sitting there ready to commit harakiri with that toy push button, and you tell me you aren't afraid? If your buddies knew how near you are to throwing away what they've fought for, they'd shoot you in a second. You're afraid of them too, aren't you? Van Cleek thrust the push button away from him and stood up.
I'm not afraid,
he shouted, and came around the desk toward Gaines. Gaines sat where he was and laughed. But you are! You're afraid of me this minute. You're afraid I'll have you on the carpet for the way you do your job. You're afraid the cadets won't salute you. You're afraid they're laughing behind your back. You're afraid of using the wrong fork at dinner. You're afraid people are looking at you. And you're afraid that they won't notice you.
I am not, he protested. You dirty, stuck-up snob. Just because you went to a high-hat school, you think you're better than anybody.
He choked and became incoherent, fighting to keep back tears of rage.
You and your nasty little cadets!
Gaines eyed him cautiously. The weakness in the man's character was evident now. He wondered why he had not seen it before. He recalled how ungracious Van Cleek had been one time when he had offered to help him with an intricate piece of figuring. The problem now was to play on his weakness, to keep him so preoccupied that he would not remember the peril-laden push-button. He must be caused to center the venom of his twisted outlook on Gaines, to the exclusion of every other thought. But he must not goad him too carelessly, or a shot from across the room might put an end to Gaines, and to any chance of avoiding a bloody, wasteful struggle for control of the road. Gaines chuckled. Van, he said, you are a pathetic little shrimp. That was a dead giveaway. I understand you perfectly. You're a third-rater, Van, and all your life you've been afraid that someone would see through you and send you back to the foot of the class. Director. Pfui. If you are the best the functionalists can offer, we can afford to ignore them. They'll fold up from their own rotten inefficiency. He swung around in his chair, deliberately turning his back on Van Cleek and his gun. Van Cleek advanced on his tormentor, halted a few feet away, and shouted, I'll show you! I'll put a bullet in you, that's what I'll do! Gaines swung back around, got up, and walked steadily toward him. Put that pop gun down before you hurt yourself. Van Cleek retreated a step. Don't you come near me, he screamed. Don't you come near me, or I'll shoot you! See if I don't! This is it, thought Gaines, and dived. The pistol went off alongside his ear. Well, that one didn't get him. They were on the floor. Van Cleek was hard to hold for a little man. Where was the gun? There! He had it! He broke away. Van Cleek did not get up. He lay sprawled on the floor, tears streaming out of his closed eyes, blubbering like a frustrated child. Gaines looked at him with something like compassion in his eyes, and hit him carefully behind the ear with the butt of the pistol. He walked over to the door and listened for a moment, then locked it cautiously. The cord from the push button led to the control board. He examined the hookup and disconnected it carefully. That done, he turned to the televisor at the control desk and called Fresno. Okay, Dave, he said. Let him attack now. But for the love of Pete, hurry! Then he cleared the screen, not wishing his watch officer to see how he was shaking. Back in Fresno the next morning, Gaines paced around the main control room with a fair degree of contentment in his heart. The roads were rolling. Before long, they would be up to speed again. It had been a long night. Every engineer, every available cadet had been needed to make the inch-by-inch inspection of Sacramento sector which he had required. Then they had to cross-connect around two wrecked subsector control boards. But the roads were rolling. He could feel their rhythm up through the floor. He stopped beside a haggard, stubbly-bearded man.
"Why don't you go home, Dave?" he asked. "McPherson can carry on from here."
How about yourself, Chief? You don't look like a June bride.
"Oh, I'll catch a nap in my office after a bit. I called my wife and told her I couldn't make it. She's coming down here to meet me."
Was she sore?
"Not very. You know how women are."
He turned back to the instrument board and watching the clicking busybodies assembling the data from 6 sectors. San Diego Circle, Angeles Sector, Bakersfield Sector, Fresno Sector, Stockton. Stockton? Stockton! Good grief! Blenkinsop! He had left a cabinet minister of Australia cooling his heels in the Stockton office all night long. He started for the door while calling over his shoulder,
"Dave, will you order a car for me? Make it a fast one."
He was across the hall, and he had his head inside his private office before Davidson could acknowledge the order.
"Dolores,
Yes, Mr. Gaines.
call my wife and tell her I had to go to Stockton. If she's already left home, just have her wait here. And Dolores,
Yes, Mr. Gaines.
calm her down."
She bit her lip, but her face was impassive. Yes, Mr. Gaines.
"That's a good girl."
He was out and started down the roadway. When he reached road level, the sight of the rolling strips warmed him inside and made him feel almost cheerful. He strode briskly way toward a door marked Access Down, whistling softly to himself. He opened the door, and the rumbling, roaring rhythm from down inside seemed to pick up the tune even as it drowned out the sound of his whistling.
"Hi, hi, he, the rotormen are we. Check off your sectors loud and strong. 1, 2, 3. Anywhere you go, you are bound to know that your roadways go rolling along."
And that was The Roads Must Roll by Robert Heinlein. Yes, some of their views on women and sociology are, ever so slightly dated. Just a little bit, considering this is from 1940, June of 1940. But yeah, that was a cute one, I thought. Kind of, as the letter from the editor's note kind of indicated, it's an exercise in world building, I guess. And that's kind of what I like about science fiction short stories is when they feel like they've got a certain internal consistency. And this, despite being for a society that is unfortunately kind of utopian by our standards, in that people are generally have their act together and behave, damn it, with some exceptions, is kind of an interesting series of ideas. Also, the imagery is pretty cool. Things I'll give Heinlein a lot of credit for. He wrote visual imagery really well. Say what you will about his politics, he could do visuals and wrote in a way that's generally very readable, unless he's deliberately trying to be unreadable, like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. God, that is such a hard book to read. I'm so sorry that things went down the way they did with that. I still beat myself up over that one. I feel like I could have done better, but it's fine. It's a good story. It's a good book. I recommend it. If only so that you know that when you need to rise up under your oppressors, here's how you use a cell-based revolutionary system. Let's go! Remember. Remember, kids. If by capturing one of your guerrilla cells they can find their way to the top, you screwed up, and you should not do your cell organization that way. Also, get a borderline Deus Ex Machina computer to do all your work for you. That helps. Sorry. And it's like Starship Troopers. I know, particularly in recent years, people get really excited over the implied politics of Starship Troopers, but I gotta be honest, it's like it's a science fiction novel. Get over yourself. Whether he believed it or not, and by all accounts he did, that was the better way to run society. It's like, okay, that's fine. It's still a science fiction novel. Like, this is a hypothetical society, and it had in its own way some internal consistency. That's one of the less consistent ones that he's done, I guess, but it's still a ripping read. It's a gripping read. It's like it's a lot of fun to read. um, so I give Heinlein a lot of credit for being highly readable. Say what you will about his shorts, like, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to delve into like Stranger from a Strange Land, or my personal favorite whipping book, I Will Fear No Evil. I Shall Fear No Evil. I Will Fear No Evil, which is, and I wish I were making this up, basically a story about a skeezy, wealthy old dude who wants to live forever and has his brain transplanted into his relentlessly horny, it turns out, secretary. And basically, he and inner voice secretary, basically every person they meet, she's like, I tapped that. And he's like, ooh, that's hot. It is gross. It like, by modern standards, it's pretty skeezy. Even at the time, I think it was fairly skeezy. I'm not going to get into the weird social arrangements that were in Stranger in a Strange Land. That's a whole thing. I could speak at length at how weird Stranger in a Strange Land is, but at least I thought it had some merit as a setting, whereas I Will Fear No Evil is just friggin' boring. It's a really boring book. It's incredibly boring. I'm just like, wow, yes, I really want to know about how she totally wanted to bang that dude. Yes, I really want to know how old man brain inside young woman body is reacting to the prospect of getting laid. I really, really want to hear about. Yes, yes, Heinlein. Yes, yes, I know they're people. Yes, I know sex is part of the human condition. But damn, these are some horny, wealthy people. What is going on? So, rant about I Will Fear No Evil over. I'm actually pressed for time, so I can't do the future science one, which was on page 100. Unnamed, as yet unnamed. Yeah, Introduction to a Nameless Science. Probably the most unusual article Astounding has ever published. This material genuinely needs the editorial statement that its material is entirely factual. It opens out a completely new and unimagined field of research out of deep interest to a dozen branches of existing science. I'll try and read that at a later date. Speaking of later dates, bad news. I am not going to. Well, actually, anybody who's been paying attention for the last couple episodes knows that I knew about this a while back. I'm not going to be around next Friday, and probably not next Monday either. I am out of state, dealing with things.
Let's just say it involves frag, a server farm, and maintenance, and leave it at that.
So next week I won't be here, but the week after, the week of, which is it, the 14th, I'll be back. I should be back. I actually don't know if I'll be, because something related to the person that I answered the door earlier actually is happening on Wednesday. So call it like, basically I'm gone from the 5th onwards until the beginning of the week after. So I'm like not here until the 17th, after next week. We'll deal with that. But at that point, so on the 14th, look forward to me starting a read through of Starfish by Peter Watts. I will have a link posted in the description where you can read along with me if you so choose, because he's got it up available for anyone to read for free on his website. Because Peter Watts is a cool, rebellious dude. Alrighty, with that, I've got to run. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks to everyone who will tune in eventually, because who knows when. Now that's server technicians. That's functionalists. Yeah, Starfish. Starfish is the least problematic of that series, followed by Maelstrom, and then Behemoth is where you run into some issues, possibly. Not for the faint of heart. It's still not for the faint of heart because Peter Watts is involved, and he has a writing style that's rather visceral, and he tends to write about things that are fairly visceral. It's going to be about some pretty messed up people doing things, living their lives in a pretty messed up world. Not that much more messed up than the one we're in. Just like, a couple days after tomorrow, that sort of thing. So look forward to that. I have to come up with some voices for that one. I don't know how I'm going to do Lenny Clark. I'll figure it out. I have a bunch of voices that I'm going to have to do. So it's, I don't know if there'll be new ones. You'll hear the same cast, because once I can get my throat around and mouth around one of them, I'm going to stick to it because I can do it again. So we'll do Starfish. What I'm kind of thinking for like the year going forward into next year is like kind of trade off between Starfish, the Rifters trilogy installments, and what's it called? The Area X trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. Because I really do want to get some Jeff Vandermeer in this stream because I think he's really cool and he writes some very interesting stuff. He's got very interesting prose, and I feel like the Area X trilogy is fairly accessible. It's fairly readable, aloud and otherwise. I love the book Born, Borne, but it is kind of hard to read aloud because there's some word jokes that kind of only work in text. So you know how born is a homonym for born and born? Yeah, there's a bunch of that. Born's behavior would not be born. It makes sense in context. It's really cool because it's got some of the wildest visual imagery of anything I've ever read. It is wild. So this is not what we're going to be reading, but let me sell you on the book Born, Borne. Giant kaiju-sized telekinetic doom grizzly bear that's sentient and mean as hell. There are many other aspects to Born that are worth mentioning, like the world setting, which is absolutely fantastic. But let me just leave you with the giant flying telekinetic super bear and leave it at that for now. It's something else. Area X doesn't have that, but it does have one of my absolute favorite pieces of what I like to call spook fiction or spook punk. If that's a thing, it's not a thing. I'm making it a thing. Spook fiction, where you're basically dealing with not spooky things, but like, government officials dealing with, general paranoia. I would consider the X-Files kind of a spook fiction thing. I would consider any of the SCP stuff to be sort of spook fiction. So we'll be doing Area X. The second book is the one I'm looking forward to most. The third book is where things go completely off the rails into like straight up Lovecraftian horror territory. They're kind of already there. Like you're introduced to some of that in the first book, and then the second book is kind of like, oh, well, this seems really normal, until you're like, this is not normal. Everything's really, really wrong here. And then the third book is like, everything's wrong. The world is doomed / wrong, and wrongness pervades. I'm so hyped. I'm excited. Starfish is less like that. It's less trippy and a lot more what happens when you push a system to its breaking point and then other systems take over. That's kind of the Rifters trilogy, I guess, is kind of paradigm shifts in systems, I guess. It's sort of an oversimplification, but I think that kind of holds out. Whatever. I hope people dig it. I will see people next time. Thanks for tuning in. I gotta run. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And if it's a nice day out like it is here, damn, get outside. Alrighty, if you're not already. Alrighty, see you all later. Thanks again. Bye.